It began on a quiet night at the Earth Deep Space Listening Center, when a young technician named Ryan noticed something strange blinking on his monitor. At first he thought it was just background noise, the usual static hum that came from deep space. But then the signal repeated. It was faint, trembling, and filled with a strange rhythm that didn't match any known natural pattern. He leaned closer, heart beating fast as the code resolved into a steady stream of symbols. It wasn't human. It was a message. He quickly called his supervisor, and within minutes the entire control room came alive. Scientists, linguists, and engineers crowded around the display as the alien signal continued, pleading for help in a language no one had ever seen before. The signal was analyzed again and again. At first they thought it might be an echo or interference from a distant probe. But then came the translation breakthrough. The artificial intelligence unit assigned to linguistic decryption found recurring structures that matched patterns of known languages. After several hours, a few words became clear, words that sent chills down everyone's spine. Help us. Please help us. Within hours, the news spread across every space agency and research center on Earth. The transmission originated from a star system known as Taralis 9, over 40 light-years away. Telescopes were aimed immediately at the coordinates, and what they saw confirmed the terror in that message. The star at the center of the system was unstable, erupting in massive solar flares that scorched the nearby planets. The third planet, where the signal had come from, was being bombarded by deadly radiation and wild energy bursts. Cities glowed like burning dots, their outlines vanishing beneath oceans of fire. It was clear this was not a trick. An entire civilization was dying, and they were begging for someone, anyone, to save them. The scientists worked around the clock to decode the rest of the message. The beings called themselves the Terralians. They were peaceful, fragile creatures who had built their society on science, art, and harmony. Their message was filled with desperation and sorrow. They said their atmosphere was collapsing, their energy sources failing, and their technology couldn't protect them anymore. They had tried to send their distress signals across the galaxy, hoping that someone would hear before their world was gone forever. At first, Earth's governments didn't know how to react. Some believed it wasn't their problem. Humanity had its own struggles, and sending help across galaxies seemed impossible. Others feared it might be a trap. But among the public, the story caught fire. People all over the world were glued to their screens, watching the images of the dying world. The Terralians, small and delicate with translucent skin and glowing eyes, became symbols of helplessness. They weren't monsters or invaders, they were victims. Children drew pictures of them. People prayed for them. For once, humanity's attention turned outward, beyond their own world. The scientists who had been studying interstellar travel came forward with an idea. In recent years, the UN Space Command had been developing long-range rescue ships capable of enduring extreme conditions, vessels built to survive black holes, asteroid fields, and deadly radiation zones. They were known as Deathworld-class ships, designed and piloted by humans, the only species strong enough to handle such environments. Other alien races had long called Earth a death world because of its dangerous nature, predators, diseases, storms, and unpredictable weather. To survive there was considered nearly impossible, but humans had not only survived, and they had thrived. That reputation, once feared, was now being tested in a way no one expected. As the world debated whether to send help, small groups of people took action. Petitions filled the internet, demanding a rescue mission. Scientists volunteered, engineers offered designs. It became a movement, a rare moment where nations and people united for a cause beyond themselves. Even those who doubted the mission couldn't ignore the growing sense of duty. Humanity had been called many things, dangerous, reckless, destructive, but now they had a chance to prove something else. Weeks passed as teams from every major space agency gathered to study the situation. The Terralian system was still being torn apart by its dying star. Time was running out. Satellites captured final images of the planet's surface. Huge cracks splitting its crust, oceans boiling, skies filled with radiation storms. The messages from the Terralians grew weaker, their voices fading with static. Some parts of their transmission contained songs, soft, haunting melodies that sounded like prayers. The scientists who listened often had tears in their eyes. It was as if an entire species was singing its farewell to the universe. Then came the turning point. Commander Helena Cross, a decorated officer from the Earth Fleet, stepped forward during a press conference. She was known for her bravery during the Mars evacuation crisis and had a reputation for never backing down from danger. Standing before the world, she said calmly, "If no one else will go, humanity will." Her words spread everywhere, sparking a wave of support. Volunteers flooded in, pilots, engineers, medics, all ready to risk their lives to save a world they had never seen. The United Nations approved the mission within 48 hours. Meanwhile, in orbit, the UNS Vanguard, the most advanced Deathworlder-class ship ever built, was being prepared for departure. It was reinforced with radiation shields, emergency reactors, and new propulsion systems that could endure near-star conditions. Every inch of the ship was designed to withstand the kind of hell the Terralian world was facing. The crew trained relentlessly, practicing rescue scenarios in simulated storms and collapsing environments. They knew the odds of survival were low, but that didn't stop them. Humanity had always faced impossible odds, and somehow they always found a way. On the day of the launch, millions gathered around the world to watch. Some stood in silence, others cheered. The countdown echoed across television screens and digital feeds. 3, 2, 1. The engines ignited, lighting up the sky as the Vanguard rose through the clouds, leaving behind a trail of fire and hope. The mission had begun. As the ship disappeared into the darkness of space, a strange silence filled the command center on Earth. No one knew what awaited them out there. The Terralians' last message had ended abruptly, their signal breaking into fragments of light and sound. No one even knew if there would be anyone left to save. But one thing was certain. For the first time in history, the feared Deathworlders weren't going to war. They were going to rescue. In the following days, small details about the mission leaked through official updates. The crew had established communication with the outer regions of the Terralian system. They had already detected massive radiation spikes. The star's energy output was rising beyond all prediction. It was dying, and it would take the planet with it. The Terralian civilization, once peaceful and shining with art and wisdom, had only days left. Back on Earth, the world waited. People prayed. Children made signs saying, "Save the Terralians." The internet filled with songs and videos inspired by the aliens' cries for help. It wasn't just about another species anymore. It was about proving that compassion could reach beyond stars. Humanity, born on a harsh and dangerous planet, had learned to survive anything, now that strength would be used not to conquer, but to protect. And as the UNS Vanguard raced through the void, its engines glowing against the blackness of space, the crew inside looked at one another in silence. None of them knew what the next few weeks would bring. But deep down, they all shared one thought, that maybe, just maybe, this was the day when Deathworlders would show the galaxy what humanity truly meant. The news of the Terralians' distress signal had shaken the whole world. Every channel, every network, and every news feed carried the same burning question: would humanity go and help? The message had reached the United Nations Space Council, where leaders from across the globe were gathered. The air in the Grand Chamber was heavy with tension. Screens glowed with live data from telescopes showing the dying Terralian world, surrounded by massive solar storms. The sound of static from the alien transmission echoed softly through the room, as if the universe itself was begging them to decide. Some argued that the mission was too dangerous. The Terralian system was unstable, and the radiation levels were far beyond safe limits. "We would be sending our people to die," one council member said firmly. "We don't even know if anyone there is still alive." Others disagreed. "We have a moral duty," said another voice. "If we can help, then we must." The arguments grew louder, filled with fear and doubt. But beneath the chaos, one truth was clear. Humanity couldn't just watch and do nothing. The Deathworlder reputation had always followed humans wherever they went. To other alien races, Earth was a nightmare planet, full of violent storms, diseases, predators, and natural disasters that no other species could survive. Yet somehow humans had thrived there. Their bodies had adapted, their minds had learned resilience, and their spirit had turned unbreakable. They were known as the toughest species in the galaxy, the Deathworlders. Now that same toughness was being called upon to save a fragile world light years away. In a secret meeting room, Commander Helena Cross stood quietly, watching the Terralian transmission loop on a small holographic display. The alien voices trembled with fear, their glowing eyes filled with desperation. She clenched her fists. She had seen death before. On Mars during the colony collapse when a reactor meltdown nearly wiped out an entire city. She had lost friends, seen chaos, and made impossible choices. But this was different. This wasn't about soldiers or politics. This was about life itself. A soft knock came at the door. "Commander, the Council wants your input," said an aide. Helena nodded, straightened her uniform, and entered the chamber. As soon as she walked in, the room fell silent. Everyone knew her record. Fearless, stubborn, and always the one to step forward when others stepped back. The Council chair asked her directly, "Commander Cross, you've seen the data. If we authorize a rescue mission, can it be done?" Helena looked at the flickering hologram of the dying world. The answer wasn't simple. The journey would take weeks through dangerous radiation belts. The solar storms would tear through most shields. Any small error could mean instant death. But she didn't hesitate. "It can be done," she said firmly. "It will take everything we have, and we'll lose people if we fail. But if there's even a chance that someone on that planet is still alive, then we have to try." Her words hung in the air. For a moment, no one spoke. Then, one by one, heads began to nod. The decision was made. Humanity would go. The mission was named Operation Dawnlight, a symbol of hope in the darkness. The chosen ship for the mission was the UNS Vanguard, the most advanced Deathworlder vessel ever built. It was designed for survival under extreme conditions. Heavy armor plating, dual radiation shields, and reinforced engines capable of traveling through starstorms. Every component had been tested against the harshest forces nature could offer. Still, no one had ever attempted something like this before. Helena began assembling her crew. She handpicked people not only for their skills but for their courage. Her first choice was Chief Engineer Marco Silva, a brilliant mechanic from Brazil who once repaired a reactor with nothing but scrap metal and determination. Then came Dr. Ilara Wynn, a biologist specializing in alien physiology, known for her calm even in crisis. The pilot was Lieutenant Aaron Blake, a daring flyer who once landed a ship through an asteroid storm with engines half dead. Together they formed the backbone of the mission, a team of Deathworlders ready to walk into fire. Training began immediately. The crew spent weeks inside radiation chambers learning how to survive under pressure. They practiced emergency repairs, rescue protocols, and communication drills. Every day Helena pushed them harder. "We don't have the luxury of failure," she reminded them. "The Terralians are running out of time." Despite the exhaustion, the crew grew stronger. They began to feel not like individuals, but like a single living machine, every member depending on the others completely. Meanwhile, the world watched. Children followed the crew's progress online, sending messages of encouragement. Artists painted murals of the Terralians and the brave humans who were preparing to save them. The mission inspired hope like never before. Even rival nations put aside their conflicts to contribute supplies and technology. It was as if the entire planet had suddenly remembered what it meant to care. Inside the Vanguard's hangar, mechanics worked day and night. The ship looked like a steel beast, dark, enormous, and built to endure. Its surface shimmered with protective coatings and its engines hummed like the heart of a giant. The engineers tested every system again and again. They simulated storms, explosions, and power failures. Each time the Vanguard survived. It wasn't just a machine anymore. It was a symbol of humanity's will. One night, as the final preparations were being made, Helena stood alone on the observation deck, looking out at the stars. The Terralian signal was still being played quietly over the speakers, now weak, almost like a whisper. She thought about the aliens' fear, their fragile cities, their songs of sorrow. She thought about what it meant to be human, to fight, to endure, and to protect. Deep down, she knew why humanity had been chosen for this moment. No other species would dare face the impossible. But humans didn't run from chaos. They came from it. The next morning, she addressed her crew one last time. "This mission will test every limit we have," she said, her voice steady. "We're going to a world that's dying, but we're not going there to mourn. We're going there to save. The Terralians believe we're monsters. Let's show them what Deathworlders truly are." Her words lit a fire in every heart. The crew saluted, and one by one they boarded the ship. As the hangar doors opened, the bright light of the launch field poured in. Reporters, scientists, and families gathered behind the safety glass, waving goodbye. The engines roared, shaking the ground. The Vanguard began to rise, leaving behind clouds of smoke and fire. From orbit, cameras captured the ship breaking through Earth's atmosphere, glowing like a star. The world cheered, but beneath the excitement there was silence. A heavy, emotional silence filled with both pride and fear. Everyone knew that many of these brave souls might never return, but they also knew that history was being written at that very moment. As the Vanguard entered deep space, the crew settled into their stations. The ship's systems hummed steadily, but outside, the universe was vast and unforgiving. Helena looked at the holographic display showing their destination. The Terralian system, glowing faintly on the edge of the galaxy. It looked peaceful from a distance, but they all knew the chaos that awaited them there. The star's unstable flares had already begun to expand. Every second counted. Back on Earth, Mission Control continued monitoring every transmission. Scientists studied the latest data, trying to predict how long the Terralian planet could last. The numbers were grim, maybe weeks, maybe days. Still, humanity refused to give up. Across the world, people lit candles, shared messages, and whispered prayers for the brave souls flying into danger. Days passed as the Vanguard traveled through the void. The crew slept in short shifts, ran maintenance routines, and shared stories of home. They laughed sometimes, though everyone could feel the weight of what lay ahead. Commander Helena often walked the corridors at night, checking on her people. She found comfort in their determination. Each one of them had left behind families, dreams, and safety, all for the chance to save a world they had never seen. And so, the journey continued. Every light year brought them closer to the dying Terralian planet, closer to the storm that no one else dared to face. But there was no fear in their hearts, only resolve. For this was not just a mission of rescue. It was a test of what it truly meant to be human. In those silent stretches of space where stars flickered like cold candles, humanity's finest carried with them something more powerful than any weapon or machine: hope. And as the ship moved forward, slicing through the darkness like a spear of light, one thought echoed through the minds of everyone watching from Earth. The Deathworlders were coming, and this time they weren't bringing war. They were bringing salvation. The UNS Vanguard moved through the darkness of space like a lone spark against a sea of shadows. For days, the crew had been silent, focused on keeping the ship steady as it entered the most dangerous part of its journey. The Terralian system lay ahead, surrounded by violent radiation fields and bursts of solar energy so strong they could tear a ship apart. The view outside the windows was terrifying, glowing waves of orange and red light dancing like fire across the void. Every few minutes, a flare erupted, shaking the ship's sensors and blinding the monitors. It looked beautiful from afar, but to those inside, it was death waiting to strike. Commander Helena Cross stood on the command bridge, her eyes fixed on the screen. "How long till we reach the planet?" she asked calmly. The pilot, Aaron Blake, adjusted his controls. "At this speed, maybe 6 hours," he said, his voice tight. "If we don't get cooked before that." His attempt at humor earned a few nervous chuckles, but everyone knew the danger was real. Radiation alarms flickered from time to time, warning of increasing exposure levels. The ship's shield generators hummed at maximum capacity, glowing faintly blue. They were working, but only barely. In the engineering bay, Chief Marco Silva and his team were sweating as they monitored the engines. The radiation had begun to interfere with the power lines. Sparks flew from a console, and Marco quickly grabbed his toolkit. "Hold it steady," he shouted over the noise. "We lose power, we lose everything." The crew worked in perfect rhythm, patching cables and rerouting systems. They had trained for this, but simulations had never captured the real pressure of space, the knowledge that one mistake could end all of them in seconds. Dr. Alara Wynn sat in the med bay, staring at the readings of the radiation levels. Her job was to keep the crew healthy, but she knew there was little she could do if the shields failed. Still, she kept busy, preparing injections, oxygen packs, and emergency medkits. Every few hours, she walked through the corridors, checking on people. Some were pale from exhaustion. Others sat quietly, staring at the stars. They all understood the risk, but none complained. They had a mission, and they were Deathworlders. As they drew closer to the Terralian planet, they began receiving fragments of weak transmissions. The signals were broken and full of noise, but a few words managed to come through. Cries for help, coordinates, and desperate voices. "They're alive," Helena whispered, leaning closer to the console. "They're still there." Her voice filled the room with renewed energy. The crew, exhausted and scared, straightened in their seats. Every moment of pain suddenly felt worth it. When the planet finally appeared on the main screen, the entire crew fell silent. It was a sight no one could have prepared for. The world below was covered in thick, swirling storms that glowed like molten gold. The atmosphere burned with electric waves. From space, they could see what looked like oceans of fire and massive cracks across the surface. Cities once bright and alive were now dark, buried under dust and smoke. "God," Aaron whispered. "How can anything survive down there?" Helena didn't answer. She only stared at the planet, her expression unreadable. Then she gave her first order. "Prepare the descent modules. We're going in." The room filled with nervous energy. Everyone moved at once. Engineers checking hull integrity, pilots setting navigation routes, and medics loading supplies. The landing through that chaos was nearly impossible, but Helena didn't care. "We didn't come here to watch," she said firmly. "We came to help." The Vanguard entered the upper atmosphere, and immediately the ship was hit by roaring winds and violent turbulence. It felt like flying through an earthquake. The hull groaned, metal screaming under pressure. "Shields at 68%. Marco shouted over the comms. "Any lower and we're done." The screens flashed red warnings. Fire licked across the ship's sides as the radiation levels spiked. Helena gripped the control bar tightly. "Stay on course," she yelled. The heat was unbearable. Inside the cabin, the lights flickered and sparks danced from the ceiling. But slowly, painfully, they broke through the storm layer. The planet's surface came into view through the haze. It was worse than anyone imagined. Entire regions were scorched, with rivers of magma flowing through cracked ground. The sky glowed an angry orange filled with dust and lightning. In the distance, faint blue lights flickered underground, signs of the Terralians' shelters. Aaron managed to steady the ship as it descended into a clearer zone near the coordinates they had received. The landing gear touched down hard, shaking the entire vessel. For a moment, no one moved. They had done it. Against all odds, they had landed on a dying world. But they knew this was only the beginning. Helena stood, putting on her helmet. "Team Alpha with me," she said. "We'll head for the nearest shelter and make contact." Her voice was calm, but inside her heart pounded. The door hissed open and a wave of hot, toxic air flooded in. The temperature outside was far beyond what any normal being could survive. The landscape looked like the end of the world. Black ground cracked open, glowing rivers of lava and dust storms that roared like beasts. The crew stepped out, their boots sinking into the ash-covered ground. Every step felt heavy. The wind howled, pushing against their suits. Through the haze, Helena could see shapes moving. Tall, fragile figures standing near a broken metal dome. The Terralians. She raised her hand slowly, signaling that they came in peace. The aliens hesitated at first, their glowing eyes filled with fear and disbelief. Then as one of them stepped forward, Helena could see tears forming in its crystal-like eyes. The Terralians fell to their knees, overwhelmed. Their translator devices quickly adjusted to the Terralian language. "You came," the alien leader said weakly. "We thought no one would come." Helena knelt down beside him. "We came," she said softly, "and we're not leaving without you." The Terralians led them underground through narrow tunnels that glowed with dim blue light. Inside the shelters, the humans saw what the storms had done. Hundreds of Terralians were gathered there, weak, trembling, their once beautiful cities now reduced to ashes. The air was thin, their food supplies nearly gone. Some had burns from radiation exposure. Children clung to their parents, too tired to cry. Helena's heart ached at the sight. Dr. Ilara and her team immediately began working. They set up medical pods, handed out oxygen tanks, and started treating the sick. The Terralians watched in awe as the humans worked tirelessly, ignoring the heat and danger. "They called us Deathworlders," one crew member said quietly. "I think now they understand why." Meanwhile, Marco and his engineering team started repairing the evacuation shuttles that the Terralians had built but couldn't power. The storms had destroyed their energy cores. Marco crawled under one of the machines, sweat dripping inside his helmet. "If I can reroute this," he muttered, "we can get these birds flying again." It took hours of work, but piece by piece he made progress. Outside, the storms grew worse. The sky flashed with burning light and the ground trembled. Aaron stayed at the ship, monitoring the weather and keeping the engines ready. Every few minutes he called Helena. "Commander, the next storm front is coming fast. If we don't lift off soon, we'll be buried here." Helena looked around at the fragile beings depending on her. "Not yet," she replied. "We still have more to bring out." By the end of that first day, they had evacuated over 200 Terralians. Each trip through the storms was a battle, shuttles shaking, winds tearing at the hull, radiation alarms blaring. Some of the crew began to feel sick from exposure, but no one stopped. The Terralians watched them in disbelief. For centuries, they had feared humans as monsters. But now those same monsters were carrying their children through fire. In one of the final rescue runs that day, Helena herself carried a young Terralian child in her arms, shielding it from falling debris. The alien looked up at her through half-closed eyes and whispered something. The translator picked it up. "You are not death. You are life." Those words hit Helena harder than any storm. For a moment she forgot her exhaustion. Humanity had been called many things, but this was something new. As night fell over the dying planet, the crew regrouped inside the Vanguard. Their suits were damaged, their energy low, but their spirits were alive. Outside, the planet roared, the sky filled with lightning and fire. Helena stood by the window watching the chaos and whispered to herself, "We can do this." They had survived the impossible journey and reached the heart of a dying world. But the hardest part was yet to come. The Terralians still needed to be evacuated in full, and the storms were growing stronger by the hour. Helena knew tomorrow would test them even more. But for now, she allowed herself a moment of pride. Humanity had reached across the stars and stood on the edge of hell, not to destroy but to save. The next morning on the dying Terralian planet began with chaos. The ground shook like a living thing, and the sky burned with red lightning. The sun above, swollen and angry, was throwing waves of deadly radiation that made the air shimmer. Inside the underground shelters, alarms screamed. The Terralians were panicking again. Their power cells were failing, oxygen was running out, and the temperature outside had risen beyond survival limits. Commander Helena Cross stood near the entrance tunnel, watching the readings on her wrist display. The numbers made her chest tighten. The storms were moving faster than expected. If they didn't complete the evacuation soon, everyone on the planet would die, including her crew. "Status report," she said into her comm. "How many are left?" Dr. Alara's voice came back, filled with tension. "About 400 Terralians still underground. Half of them too weak to walk. We're running out of oxygen tanks." Helena clenched her jaw. "Then we'll carry them if we have to." The humans worked like machines. They had divided into small teams, some guiding groups of aliens to the surface, others repairing the remaining evacuation shuttles. The Terralians' own ships were small and fragile, built for peace, not survival. Their engines could barely handle the storming skies. But Marco Silva and his engineers were doing the impossible. Inside the hangar caves, they were surrounded by sparks, smoke, and half-broken metal parts. The temperature was so high that the walls glowed faintly red. "Marco, how long until the next shuttle's ready?" Helena asked through the communicator. Marco wiped the sweat from his face. "If this thing doesn't melt, maybe an hour. But the power cores are fried. We need energy cells from the Vanguard, or these things won't lift an inch." "Take whatever you need," Helena replied. "If we lose the ship's systems, we'll fix them later. Right now, those people need to fly." Back at the landing zone, the wind howled so hard it almost knocked the crew off their feet. Aaron Blake was coordinating the takeoffs, his voice rough from shouting. "Keep the shuttles low until they clear the ridge." He yelled into his mic. Each time a shuttle rose, its hull glowed from the heat, shaking violently before disappearing into the stormy sky. Every launch was a gamble. Sometimes, they didn't know if the shuttle had made it until the signal reappeared minutes later in orbit. When one didn't, silence would fill the channel. The crew never asked questions. They just kept working. Helena moved between groups, helping where she could, lifting wounded Terralians, sealing cracks in their shelter walls, and giving orders. The aliens looked at her with wide, glowing eyes, full of both awe and confusion. They had never seen beings like humans before, strong, scarred, determined, willing to walk through death for strangers. One Terralian elder, his body frail and trembling, took Helena's hand and whispered through the translator, "We thought your kind were demons, but you walked through fire to save us." Helena only smiled faintly and said, "We've walked through worse." As hours passed, the situation became desperate. A massive storm front was approaching from the east, the largest yet. The sky turned black and bolts of lightning struck the ground like spears. The heat melted the rocks and shock waves ripped through the air. "Commander," Aaron shouted. "The main storm is going to hit in less than 2 hours. If we're still here, we're done." Helena looked at the Terralians around her, hundreds of them still waiting for rescue. Many were children clinging to their parents. "We're not leaving yet," she said firmly. "Not while there's still one left." Marco and his team pushed themselves beyond exhaustion. Their hands were burned and bleeding, but they didn't stop. Finally, one of the Terralian ships roared to life, its engines glowing bright blue. "We've got power!" Marco shouted, his voice breaking with relief. "Get them on board!" Dr. Alara and her assistants began loading the sick and injured first. The Terralians moved in organized lines, helping one another. The air was full of noise, roaring engines, screaming winds, and the distant rumble of the planet breaking apart. When the shuttle lifted off, Helena watched it rise through the storm until it vanished into the sky. Then she turned back. "Next group," she called out. As the storm closed in, the ground cracked under their feet. Lava and smoke poured from the fractures. The heat burned through their boots. Helena could hear the screams of Terralians behind her as debris began to fall from above. She grabbed a child who had stumbled and carried her toward the final shuttle. "Keep moving," she shouted over the chaos. "Don't stop." A huge explosion shook the ground. One of the nearby structures collapsed, trapping several aliens inside. Without thinking, Helena ran toward it. Aaron called after her, "Commander, no. The storm's too close." But she didn't stop. She climbed through the falling debris, her suit alarms blaring. Inside the collapsed shelter, she found 3 Terralians pinned under metal beams. Her oxygen was running low, but she refused to leave them. She lifted one beam with her bare hands, using every ounce of strength she had. "Come on," she gasped. "Move!" One by one, she pulled them free and guided them toward safety. When they reached the open ground, Aaron was waiting with 2 crew members to help them onto the shuttle. The final phase of the evacuation began. The Vanguard's reactor was unstable now, its shields weakening from continuous radiation exposure. Marco warned Helena through the comms, "Commander, we can't stay any longer. The reactor's overheating. If it blows, we'll take half this valley with us." Helena hesitated. "How many still left?" Dr. Alara's voice cracked as she answered, "Maybe 50. All from the far shelter. They can't reach us in time." Helena took a deep breath. "Then we go to them." Her crew protested, but she didn't listen. She and 4 others grabbed the last hover transport and raced across the burning terrain. The storm was almost overhead now, fire swirling in the air, the ground quaking with every second. The heat sensors flashed red continuously. "Hold on!" Aaron's voice came through the comms, filled with panic. "You've got less than 20 minutes. When they reached the far shelter, the sight broke her heart. The structure was collapsing, and the Terralians inside were trapped. She could see their glowing eyes through the dust filled with terror. "It's okay," she shouted, her voice muffled through the helmet. "We're here." The humans broke through the rubble using plasma cutters, their movements quick and desperate. One of the walls gave way, and the Terralians stumbled out, coughing and shaking. Helena guided them toward the transport, counting them one by one. A massive tremor shook the ground. The planet itself was tearing apart. "We have to go," Marco shouted through the radio. The storm roared like thunder, lightning slamming into the earth just meters away. Helena helped the last Terralian into the transport and climbed aboard. "Go," she yelled. The pilot slammed the controls and the vehicle shot forward, dodging falling debris and rivers of fire. The return to the Vanguard was a blur of chaos. Visibility was almost zero. The ship's beacon glowed faintly through the storm, a single light of hope. "We see you," Aaron's voice came through. "Hang on, we've got you on radar." The transport lifted off the ground, shaking violently. A huge gust of wind slammed into them, throwing the vehicle sideways. Alarms screamed. For a moment it seemed like they would crash, but Aaron managed to guide them in using the Vanguard's tractor beam. The transport hit the landing bay hard, sliding across the floor. The doors sealed shut behind them, blocking the storm. Everyone inside the ship cheered weakly, their relief mixing with exhaustion. The Terralians huddled together, trembling but alive. Helena took off her helmet, her face pale and soaked with sweat. She looked around at her crew, burned, bruised, but smiling. "That's everyone," she said quietly. "We got them all." But their relief didn't last long. Marco's voice came through the intercom again, this time urgent. "Commander, the reactor is critical. We've got maybe 15 minutes before it goes." Helena turned to Aaron. "Prepare for launch. Get us out of here." The engines roared to life. The ground beneath the Vanguard cracked open, glowing with molten fire. The ship shook as it rose, pieces of debris hitting the hull. "We're not going to clear the atmosphere if the reactor gives out," Aaron shouted. Helena gritted her teeth. "We'll clear it. Push the engines to full." The ship climbed higher and higher. Behind them, the Terralian planet began to break apart completely. The crust split into massive plates, magma exploding into the sky. The bright sun expanded one last time, swallowing the horizon in light. Inside the ship, everyone held their breath as the vibration reached its peak. Then suddenly, silence. The Vanguard broke free into the upper atmosphere, escaping the storm's reach. The engines cooled and the shaking stopped. They had made it. Helena leaned back in her seat, eyes closed. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to breathe deeply. Around her, the Terralians wept softly, looking at the burning world below them. It was gone, their home reduced to ash. But they were alive. Humanity had given them another chance. When the radio came alive again, it was the voice of Earth Command. "Vanguard, this is Mission Control. We're receiving your signal. Is the mission complete?" Helena opened her eyes, staring at the distant stars beyond the shattered planet. "Mission complete," she said quietly. "The Terralians are safe." In that moment, every member of the crew felt the weight of what they had done. They had faced death itself and refused to bow. They had proven that Deathworlders were not monsters, but protectors. And as the Vanguard turned toward home, leaving the dying light of the Terralian sun behind, Helena whispered the words that would later be remembered across galaxies. "No one dies when humans still fight." Days had passed since the evacuation, but for everyone aboard the Vanguard, time felt strange. The vast emptiness of space stretched endlessly outside the ship's windows, and yet every person inside carried the same heavy silence. The Terralians had survived, but their planet was gone. No home, no sky, no place to return to. They floated now in the dark with only the humans and their compassion to depend on. Commander Helena Cross stood on the observation deck, looking out at the glowing remains of the Terralian world. The planet was now nothing more than a ring of fire and debris, a glowing wound in space. It was beautiful and tragic at the same time. Dr. Elara approached quietly, holding a medical scanner. "Most of the Terralians are recovering," she said softly. "Their bodies are weak, but they're stable. Emotionally." She hesitated. "They're broken, Helena. They've lost everything." Helena didn't look away from the window. "I know," she whispered. "But they're alive. That's something to start with." In the lower decks, Marco and Aaron were inspecting the ship's damaged systems. The Vanguard had taken a brutal beating during the rescue. The hull was scorched, the main reactor barely functioning, and their long-range comms were still unreliable. "We'll need at least 2 weeks before we can jump to the nearest colony," Marco muttered, tapping a cracked console. "If this ship were a person, I'd say it needs rest and therapy." Aaron gave a tired chuckle. "Don't we all?" They both looked around at the Terralians resting nearby. The aliens had strange, translucent skin that shimmered faintly in the dim light. Their large, glowing eyes followed every human movement with curiosity and quiet gratitude. A few of them were trying to communicate using the translator devices Helena's team had set up. The humans shared their food, their blankets, and their warmth. Even though their species were worlds apart, something invisible was growing between them, a bond forged in fire and loss. One evening, a small Terralian girl, no more than 6 years old, wandered into the control deck. She carried a small piece of crystal in her hands, the last remnant of her destroyed home. She looked up at Helena and asked through the translator, "Why did you save us?" Helena knelt down and smiled gently. "Because life is precious," she said. "No one should have to die alone." The girl's glowing eyes filled with tears, and she hugged Helena tightly. That simple gesture said more than words ever could. As days turned into weeks, the ship slowly began to recover. The humans worked tirelessly, fixing systems, patching hull damage, and rationing supplies. Every crew member shared their time with the Terralians, teaching them human customs and learning theirs in return. The aliens were peaceful and artistic by nature. Even in sorrow, they created. painting glowing symbols on the ship's walls, singing soft melodies that echoed like wind through glass. The humans began to feel their pain lessen a little each day, replaced by quiet admiration. But not everything was peaceful. Deep in the engineering bay, Marco discovered something troubling. "Helena," he said one night over the comm, his voice tense. "The radiation from the dying star left a charge in our main reactor. It's unstable. If we don't release it soon, we could lose the ship." Helena frowned. "Options?" Marco exhaled. "Only one. We have to vent the core manually, but the radiation field outside is still active. Whoever goes out there won't come back." Helena's heart sank. She had thought the worst was behind them. Now, once again, the lives of everyone aboard were at risk. Aaron, standing beside her, immediately said, "I'll do it." "No," Helena replied sharply. "That's an order. We've already lost enough." "Then who?" Aaron asked quietly. Helena didn't answer right away. She looked out at the Terralians sitting in the corridor, fragile, exhausted, but alive because of them. Then she said, "We'll find another way." For hours, the crew worked to design a remote system to vent the core, but the ship's damage made it impossible. Finally, Marco stepped forward, removing his gloves. "Commander, it has to be done from outside. I'm the only one who can calibrate it fast enough." Helena looked at him, her eyes full of conflict. "You'll die out there," Marco smiled faintly. "Someone once told me humans don't leave anyone behind. I'm just keeping the tradition alive," no one argued. They all knew what it meant. Before he left, the Terralians gathered in the hangar, their glowing hands raised in a silent gesture of respect. The same little girl from before approached Marco and pressed the crystal into his hand. "So you remember light," she said softly. He nodded, eyes wet, and smiled. "I'll carry it with me." The airlock opened and Marco stepped into the darkness of space. His suit lights flickered against the debris field. Every second was a battle against time and radiation. His hands shook as he unlocked the reactor panel and began the sequence. Inside the Vanguard, everyone watched the monitors in silence. The readings climbed dangerously high. Marco's breathing grew heavy. "Almost there," he said, his voice breaking through static. Then with one final press of the control key, the radiation levels dropped. The ship stabilized. Cheers broke out inside, but they faded quickly when his signal began to fade. Marco returned to the ship. Helena shouted. There was no reply. The last thing they heard was his voice saying, "Tell them." It was worth it. Then the signal died. The silence that followed felt endless. Even the Terralians wept. They had never understood sacrifice before, not like this. Helena stood frozen, her hands trembling. She had seen death before, but losing someone who had saved an entire civilization felt like a wound that would never heal. Later, when the Vanguard's engines finally came back online, the ship turned toward the nearest human colony. The Terralians stood together at the observation deck, watching the stars. Their leader, Elder Karen, approached Helena. His voice was calm but full of emotion. "We did not understand what it meant to be a Deathworlder," he said. "We thought it meant destruction, chaos, violence. But now we see it means courage. It means heart." Helena nodded, her eyes glistening. "Deathworlders don't fight for death," she said softly. "We fight so others can live." The Terralians would remember those words for generations. They would carve them into their new monuments, teach them to their children, and carry them across the stars. When the Vanguard reached the human colony, the survivors were greeted like heroes. Humans and Terralians stood side by side, two species united by one shared story. The day Deathworlders saved an entire civilization. Years later, when the Terralians had built their new homeworld, they invited Helena and her crew to visit. The new planet was lush and alive, full of light. At the center of their capital stood a tall monument, a spiral of silver and crystal glowing softly under the sun. On its base was an inscription in both human and Terralian languages. It read, "To those who walk through fire for others, to those who do not run from death but defy it." Helena stood there quietly, tracing the words with her fingers. Around her, Terralian children laughed and played, their eyes shining with the same hope she had once feared was lost. Dr. Alara joined her, smiling. "They made it, Helena. They really made it." Helena nodded. "So did we." That night, the Terralians held a ceremony under their twin moons. They sang the same haunting songs they had sung on the Vanguard, but now the notes carried peace instead of sorrow. When the song ended, the little Tyrallian girl, now older, braver, handed Helena a small crystal necklace. "It's from our first mines," she said. "To remember the light you gave us." Helena smiled, tears in her eyes. "I won't forget." As the moons rose higher, she looked up at the stars and thought of Marco. Somewhere out there, his memory drifted among them, shining like the crystal in her hand. Humanity had proven something greater than strength or power. They had shown compassion that crossed galaxies. When the Tyrallians built their first fleet years later, they painted the name of their flagship in bold human letters, the Vanguard 2. Below it, in Tyrallian script, they added one line, a phrase that became a legend across the stars. "No one dies when humans still fight." And so, the story of the Deathworlders spread, not as destroyers but as saviors. Across countless worlds, alien children would hear tales of humans who walked through storms and fire, who risked everything for strangers, and who proved that even from the most dangerous worlds the greatest hearts can rise.